Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are accepting the challenge, so stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today we are going to make baby quilts. If you saw my video on the kindness of quilters, you will remember that Sue and Karin have given me all the supplies that I need to sew while I wait for my overseas shipment to arrive. And the challenge that Sue gave to me when she gave me buckets of fabric was to make as many baby quilts as I can. So we are going to dive in and give it a shot. The challenge from Sue was to take all of her buckets of fabric, as well as a pile of neutrals, and then a few little sets of fat quarters, and make as many baby quilts as I can. So that's the challenge. So you've already seen, and Sue has them organized so beautifully. How can you not be inspired by these buckets of rainbow fabric? It's so beautiful. So you have already seen the reverse Irish chains that I've made out of the blues and the teals that were in here. And there's still a really nice collection of them. And then this, and these are almost all fat quarters. There's a couple of half yards, but for the most part, these are all fat quarters. Some of them are solids, and then some of them are printed. So that is interesting. These are, for the most part, this whole row is all 4.5-inch squares. So I think I'm going to lay out at least one trip around the world and see what I end up with these. You may have seen my video on how to plan a trip around the world. So I think I'm going to tap into that experience to make a trip around the world with those. And then there's some odd bits and bobs here, some darker low volumes, some black and whites, some really creamy that maybe don't go quite so well with the bright colors here, and a few other odds and ends that I'll take a look at. I've pulled out and washed and pressed all the neutrals. So there's a nice collection of neutrals here, whites and creams and beiges. And then these are the fat quarter bundles. So there's, what is there, 8 of them here, I think. These have a cute little sausage dog theme to them, so those are super cute. There's these ones with the great little pandas and koalas, and I don't know, is that a deer or a fox or whatever those are. So those are cute. 2 sets of these dinosaur fossil themed ones, super fun. The other set is over here. So I have a plan right now for 3 projects as the start of my challenge beyond the Irish chains. The first, like I said, is the trips around the world. With these dinosaur and fossil prints, I've decided that this neutral, this background, this other fabric coordinates fairly well. There's this yellow and kind of an olivey greeny yellow in it, or sorry, the orange and the olivey green yellow. And I think that that's a little bit in these dinosaur prints as well. And I have borrowed from my mom her mini puzzle set. No idea if that's what it's called, but these are super small, very different from the set I've already used, and so super cool, super keen to use those with these dinosaur fabrics. Then I have pulled out these, and it's a beautiful rainbow of solids. There's 8 of them here, I think, and then there's some cute 10-inch squares that are white with the colored dots on them. So not sure what I'm going to make with this, but I've pulled these aside because I think that they're going to work together really well. There is this little bundle of leftover bits and bobs from another project, so that's going to take some design skill. But the third project I'm going to do is this one, and this is the feature fabric that I pulled first. And it's got some really, really pretty colors in it. So I pulled out some of the other fat quarters to match, a fairly neutral background that matches these solids, which I think go really well with it. The green is a bit bright, but I really wanted to bring in some of the green from this fabric, and I've got a limited selection to work from in the buckets. This one, which I think is going to be my second feature fabric because one fat quarter isn't going to get me very far. And then I know from experience that these 2 fat quarters, I need 2 fat quarters to have enough for binding. So these 2 will be enough for binding for this project. And I think I'm gonna measure up some sort of a traditional, kind of like an Ohio star or just a typical star with this in the center and then the star legs out of these really pretty solids and the green. So I am going to get cutting and I'll take you through these step by step in this video. I'm not going to give you full patterns, but I will just walk you through kind of the thought process for each one. So the stars here, the puzzle pieces, and just using the 4.5-inch squares to make a trip around the world. So I'm going to get cutting and we can dive right in. So for project number 1, I am working with these mini puzzle templates that I borrowed from my mom. And I've just put this piece of a yellow fabric under here because I see you in the comments when I put these templates down on my regular cutting mat and they're impossible to see. So bear with the yellow while I explain what I'm up to. I measured this, and this is about a 7-inch square, which means once all the pieces are cut and all of the seams are sewn, I'm probably going to end up with something that's about a 6-inch square. And I am working with fat quarters. So I did some experimenting and I've pulled out my ruler and I've measured the different pieces of the template. Now I've decided that this B block is going to be my background block because I think it's going to give me this 4-pointed sort of pinwheel thing. And when I measured this with my ruler, it's about 2 3/4 inches wide. So that's what this strip of fabric is. And so I will just move this template across here, making sure that I don't leave it folded like this, because if you've seen my puzzle videos, you'll remember that that doesn't work. You need to have the fabrics right side up whenever you cut one of these pieces, because this piece and this piece are very, very different. So you can spin it as long as you keep it right side up. So remember that. So I've cut these at 2 3/4. I will line them up and I will cut along this entire row. And that's how I got these pieces. Then I measured the others and I found that the A piece and the C piece are 4.5 inches and the D piece is 2.5 inches. And so from my fat quarter, what I ended up doing and what I will do with these last 2 that I have left, and I don't know if you can see here, I've got these super fun dinosaurs. I didn't want to cut these up first. I thought if I messed up this little fossilized background or this kind of generic blue, it wouldn't be the end of the world, but I didn't want to mess up these dinosaur print fabrics. What I did was I cut 3 strips at 4.5 and 1 strip at 2.5. And from that, from each of the fat quarters, I've been able to cut a total of 7 of each of the puzzle pieces. So give me a minute. I will cut up one of these and I'll take you through the steps. I'm not going to repeat a huge amount like I did in my other puzzle videos. You can go check those out. But this will give you a quick sense of what I've done here with these fat quarters. With both fat quarters cut up, I have lined up 2 pieces, 2 4.5-inch pieces from my fat quarter, right sides up, no folds. I want to just reiterate, you can't, well, I guess on a perfectly equilateral triangle you can. Bad example. On this template, you can't flip it upside down. It has to stay right side up. So my fabrics are right side up. And what I'm going to do down this 4.5-inch strip is line up the template. Actually, I'm very right-handed. So I'm going to just use my straight ruler and cut off these selvage edges. And then I'm going to line up my template on the edge here. And using the template, I'm going to cut down the line. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut this first piece and then make sure to cut off these little notches. These are really important for piecing in the future. Spin this around, line it up nicely along this edge. It's the same angle, so that will line up perfectly with no waste. Cut the second set of blocks, and then right-handed, so I want to spin this around and cut the extra off. I will be able to cut 4 of them from this piece of fat quarter, from this half yard piece. Sorry, this is half of the width of fabric, so it's a fat quarter, and I'll be able to cut 4 of these. For the equilateral triangle, I will do the same thing. I will line this up here. I will cut up the edge, spin it around. Well, before I spin it around, I'm going to cut off the little divot here for piecing. These are really important to cut off. A pain in the neck maybe, but still important. Spin this around and cut down the other side, and then cut off that little piece. I don't know if I'm going to need this or not, but I'm going to save it anyway. And then because this is the same angle, I'll be able to put my triangle here and cut the next one in a similar fashion. I'm going to pull it away and then cut off these little angles. And so I'll do that down the line for both. I'll be able to get 4 of this first shape, 4 of these, and I'll be able to get 6 of the triangles. Then I'll take a moment and I'll line up my 2.5-inch pieces, and I'll find little piece D here, and I'll be able to cut 8 of these across the length of the 2.5-inch strip. At this point, I'm only going to need 7, but once I have all my pieces cut, I am going to look through what's left and see if I can't squeak out 1 more of the C block and 1 more of an A block, just to get another block, but we'll see how that goes. From the first 2 strips, I have cut 4 sets of the C template. There's 4 of them here. And I have cut 6 sets of the triangle template, template A. So from this last piece, and I've got the 2 layered, I am going to cut 3 more of the C template to get to 7, and then 1 more of the triangle template, template A, and that will get me to 7 of each one. So what I'm going to do is finish this, and then I'm going to go back through all of these leftover pieces and see what I can put together, maybe do a little math, count up what I've actually got, and decide if I need any more in order to make the quilt I have in mind. But there are 35 of each piece. And so that was 7 out of each of 5 fat quarters. And I think that that is going to actually make a fairly nice layout. After measuring the templates, I think I'm going to end up with about a 6 or maybe a 6.5-inch block. So 6 or 6.5 inches by 5 across is going to give me about 30 inches by 7 down. That'll be about 42 inches or so. And I think that'll make a decent sized baby quilt. These pieces over here are the leftovers. I could probably cobble together another 4 or 5 blocks, but that doesn't really help me with my numbers. At 35 blocks at 5 by 7, I'd probably want to maybe try and go to 6 by 7, which would mean that I would need another 7 blocks, and I'm not sure that I can get that many out of here. So I'm going to make up the 5 by 7 blocks, the 35 blocks, and see what that gets. And I think that's probably going to look really cute. So the first thing I'm going to do is sew all the A blocks to the B blocks and press those seams open. I'll sew the C and D blocks together, press those seams open, and then sew them all together. So I'll show you what the finished blocks look like and then show you the layout, and we'll call this first quilt of this whole little baby quilt challenge complete. So we have a little bit of a design problem here. This is the 35 blocks, all made up, all pressed beautifully, seams open, of course, and laid out on the floor in my very echoey living room because there's no furniture in here yet. And can you see the problem? I didn't even think about this as I was planning this block, these are pinwheels, and you need 4 of them to make a pinwheel. So my 5x7 layout is problematic because I have half finished pinwheels along one side and along 2 sides. And I think that looks terrible. It looks so bad. So the first thing I did was to try a 6x6 layout to see if I could make that work. And it looks okay, but I just don't think it's big enough for a baby quilt. So the next option is to increase it to 6x8. That means I need 13 more blocks, and I do not have a lot of fabric left. So what do you do? So what you do is you go back to your buckets of fabric and see if there's something else that you can add to make it work. So I've dug into the extras and I have a couple of options. And as I've learned, each fat quarter will make 7 blocks. So I think each of these will work, but I think I'm going to go with these 2 blues. They're sort of the most innocuous out of all of them. And there are some scraps of the original 5 fat quarters. So let's go over to the cutting table and see if we can squeeze out 13 more blocks to make this work. After a little bit of a setback yesterday, this is important to record my videos, but it fell on the floor last night. So thanks to Amazon, in 13 hours, I'm not even kidding, I have a whole new set and we are back to recording. So if the audio is a little different, this is why. So we were looking to make 13 more of these mini puzzle blocks in order to finish up the quilt and finish up those pinwheels in a way that looks far better than they look now. So I'm going to need 13 more of the B block, and that comes out of this background fabric, and I've got gobs of that, so that's not going to be a problem. Then I need 13 more of the D block, and this is a 2.5-inch piece. So I have a few here that I miscut actually, so there's 3 of them there. And then from the other 2 fabrics, I have enough here. So I'll get 5 of the D blocks from these leftovers. And then these are also leftover pieces from the fat quarters. I've saved everything because you never know. So the 1.5-inch piece, probably not terribly useful. Same with the 2-inch piece, but I have 3 pieces that are 2.5 inches, and I will be able to get the remainder of the 13 pieces of the D block that I need out of those. So that's easy done. The more complicated pieces, though, are going to be the C and E blocks, or sorry, C and A blocks. These require the full 4.5-inch piece, strip of fabric. And these are the pieces that I have left. I have 5 of these. Some of them are different lengths, but there's 5 of those, 1 from each fat quarter. Same thing here. I have these pieces and these pieces. So here's what I think I'm going to do. This is the wrong angle for the C block. And remember, you can't flip this upside down. It has to stay right side up. So that's not going to work. But the A block will fit in here and I will be able to get 5 more A triangles. So that's a good start. This angle, however, is the right angle for the C block. So what I think I'm going to do is find their matching pieces in here, sew a seam down there, and then cut the C block out of those leftovers. So that'll give me 5 more of each of these. So that just leaves 8 of each in order to get to the 13 blocks I need for the project. And so in looking through the collection of fat quarters, I have found this one. And I think that this will go quite well. The blues match quite nicely. It's fairly unobtrusive. And so I think I'm going to do, what I think I'm going to do is cut those extra pieces I need, those big C and A blocks, out of this fat quarter. And but all of that, I will have used up all the bits and pieces of these original fat quarters. I think I will have enough to get the 13 extra blocks I need. So I'm going to cut all of that up and I will report back on progress. So I have cut my 5 triangles. They turned out well. And I've sewn these seams. Can you see that seam? And then cut these C pieces. In this highly printed one, it shows, but I don't think in the final quilt it's going to be terribly noticeable. In this plain blue, you can't I the seam is just completely gone. And so I'm thrilled with the way these 5 have turned out. And looking at what I now have left, these pieces here were the leftover from cutting the triangle. These pieces were left over from cutting my C blocks after sewing those bits together. So now, I think I'm going to be able to get 5 more. I'm going to sew these together again. And in most cases, I should be able to get my C block to fit on there. And if the piece is a tiny bit small, I should be able, the A piece, this triangle, is about a 1/4 inch shorter. So I'm going to sew these together and see if I can get 5 more pieces. These last batch of pieces together. So I have 5 triangles, 5 of the C block. And with these last pieces, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So 2 of them, these 2 pieces will work really well for the C block. This just fits. Look, there's just about a 1/4 inch to come off there. So that's going to work, which is great. This one is just a tad short, especially down here. So I don't want to use that, but it will fit the A block. So I'm going to cut the triangle out of that. Same with this multi-print one with the new seam down it. It just fits. Look, just fits. So excited to get 2 A blocks and 2 C blocks. And then there's this little piece, and it is way too small for the C block. And it also is too small for the A block. But look, I only need a tiny bit. So you know what I think I'm going to do? Is I think I'm going to take a piece either off of here or off of the leftover 2.5 inch strip. Just sew that little piece on so I can get 1 more triangle out of this really cool dinosaur fabric. And then the rest of these pieces that I need to make up the 13, I will cut out of this fat quarter. The 13 extra blocks are all finished and all laid out, and those pinwheels look so much better when they're complete. And we get a slightly larger baby quilt, which I think is very cool. The other fat quarter that I cut up to integrate, I think integrates quite well and doesn't look like an extra or like an add-on, so I'm happy with that. And I challenge anyone to find the pieces that have been sewn together in here. There are 3 that stand out for me, and I will point them out. But once this is all sewn together and quilted, I think people will be hard pressed to find them. So there is one right here. These little dinosaurs are all sewn together. There's another one up here. We cut the tail off the plesiosaur, but I think that'll be all right. And then over here is the last one. But there are probably at least 10 or 12 other blocks across the whole quilt that have piecing in them or through them down the center of the individual pieces. But I think it's going to be really hard to see. And the final project, I think, looks really great. So I'm going to sew these 48 blocks together now, and then we'll have the big reveal moment when it's finished. And so here's the final quilt top. It took a long time to get here and a lot of piecing of pieces and a few challenges along the way, but I think it's turned out really well, and the dinosaurs are super, super cute. I will definitely use these puzzle pieces again. And let's go on to the next project. For the next project, I am going to see what I can do with this giant pile of 4.5 inch squares. And of course, this layout in the box just makes me think of a rainbow, of course. And so I've designed 2 little baby quilts. And by designed, I mean plotted colors onto a grid. The first, and I'll put both of them up on the screen here so you can see them. The first is the Around the World design. And if you saw my video on how to plan a trip around the world, you'll know how I've counted up the number of blocks I'm going to need for this. And the second one is a bit of a rainbow stripe. So after plotting out Two projects. They're going to be 9 blocks by 11 blocks. So I'm going to need 99 for each one. Kind of hard to judge how many are here. So hopefully I have 99 times 2 blocks, 2 quilts. The final size, because they're 4.5-inch squares, is going to be 36 by 44. And I have my little notes here with the number of each color that I need for each of the 2 designs. So I'm going to pull those, lay them out, and get sewing. I've pulled my fabrics, and this is what I've got. But do you remember when you were a kid and you would guess the number of jelly beans in the container? Look how many pieces of fabric are still left in this container. I pulled out 198 squares, give or take a few, which I'll get into in a second, and there's still this many left. I feel like the kid who was guessing at jelly beans and guessed 200, and there's probably closer to 2,000. So these are the 2 fabric pulls for the 2 different designs. There wasn't enough orange, so I found this fat quarter in the other bin that I'll cut up for the orange for both of them. And then there wasn't quite enough blues and purples, and I'll explain once the quilts are finished what I've done here. But for the Around the World quilt, I'm going to be able to mix up these blues and put them in different quadrants of the quilt, and I think that's going to be just fine. And the same thing with the purples. I'm going to mix those up in a way that will look deliberate, but will make use of those different pieces of fabric. And then same thing over here. I need 2 rows of teal, and they're going to be different, and 2 rows of blue, and they're going to be different, but I think it's all going to work out just fine. And in pulling out these fabrics, I also found this collection here of these incredible, they must be a coordinating set of some sort. They're incredible, and they all match so beautifully. So I've pulled those out and put them aside. And we're going to have to design something specifically to use those ones. So I'm going to cut up my fat quarters, lay out the first of these little quilts, and get sewing. So I've cut up my orange fat quarter for both of the quilts. These are the 4.5-inch squares right here. I need 8 for the Around the World and 10 for the striped quilt, I think. Yes, 8 for the Around the World and 10 for the stripe. So I need 18 in total. I have 2 piles of 8. That's only 16. And I have no more fabric left. So, of course, this is Bits and Pieces Quilting. So I took the leftover little pieces and I have sewn them together and pressed that seam open on both of them. And then I will trim these down to 4.5 inches square. So I have exactly the number of squares that I'm going to need for this project. I don't think anyone's ever going to notice these tiny little seams in these 2 little blocks. And if I'm being really cheeky, maybe I'll put 1 in each of the quilts just to give a person an extra challenge to try and find them. So make the most of your fabric, my friends. Make the most of your bits and pieces and see if you can't just cobble together those last little blocks when you need them. This is the Around the World version, all laid out here on the floor and ready for me to sew together. But before I do that, I want to walk you through just a few of the little compromises that had to be made given the fabric that I had available to me. So take in that full view and see if you notice any oddities. Do you see them? There's 2 big ones I want to point out. The first is the purple. Can you see how there's these little rows of 3? But I didn't have enough. I didn't have enough of any of the purples to make them all the same. But I was able to get 8 of these ones here in the corners and then 4 of these other ones. And so I laid them out this way so that there would be the 2 matching ones with the alternate one in the middle in all 4 corners. And I figured that that would look really deliberate. My other challenge was finding enough of this shade of blue to do this round in my Around the World quilt. In the end, I have 3 different blues here. And can you see that from a distance? I really don't think it's that noticeable. So let me show you what I've done. These 4
and the 4 up in that corner all match. And I cut those from a fat quarter just a few minutes ago. And these 4 are completely different, but all the same. And the 4 up in this far corner are also completely different, but all the same. So there are 3 different blues in this quilt. And I think the compromise is acceptable for the final look of the project. I also left out the pieced together orange ones. So the other quilt, which we'll get to in a few minutes, will have the 2 pieced orange blocks in it. So I'm gonna sew these together and I'll show you the final quilt when it's finished. This is the second rainbow baby quilt all laid out, and it's so cute. I had done a drawing of the same layout but reversed the colors, and Jason and I both agreed that this was a much nicer layout for some reason. It just much more appealed to us. So there are about 4 different things I want to point out in this quilt. See if you can see them from this distance. And I'll try not to make you dizzy, but let's zoom in a little bit and let me show you some of the oddities of this layout. So the first thing are the different reds. There wasn't enough of any one red, and so they match in both corners, but I've got this little star pattern, the solid red, and then the mottled red in the corner. I think it looks deliberate. I think it looks good. The second you should recognize here are the orange squares with a seam through it. So there's one in this row and there's one up there as well. I've spaced them out. I really don't think anyone's going to notice them once the quilt is fully quilted and wrapped around a little baby. I don't think anyone's going to notice. The next oddities, I guess this is number 3 maybe, are the different teals and blues. I didn't again have enough of any one color to make them the same on both sides of the center line. And so the teals are different and the blues are different. Again, I think it looks deliberate. I haven't mixed them up, but they are different, but I think it looks all right. And then finally, this drove me a little crazy, but it had to be done. In this row of blue, I was 1 block short. So frustrating. I've been through all of the bins, all the fat quarters. There's absolutely no more of this blue fabric to get 1 last square. So I think the color family is close enough that I've just snuck in that last blue in order to round out the full size of the quilt. And you know what? If somebody notices, well, it'll just be a little novelty. But I think it's going to be fine. So the next step is to sew all of these rows together. These 2 little rainbow quilts are so cute. It took also a little bit of work to get all of the pieces to work out, piecing some pieces again, making some substitutions, a couple of little compromises. But in the end, I think they are really cheerful and really happy little quilts. And if you remember when I was pulling out the squares for the rainbow baby quilts, I also set aside these teal squares. Just sewed them together into rows like one of the rainbow quilts, but I think it looks really, really pretty because all of those fabrics coordinate so, so beautifully. This is the fabric pull for the next baby quilt. It's another collection of fat quarters as well as some yardage that Sue had included as background. So let me tell you about my plan. This was my starting piece of inspiration. It is a super cute fat quarter from Michael Miller Fabrics, and I just love it. And then I found a whole bunch of these other solids that I thought went really well with it. And so I'm thinking of doing a traditional, I think it's a sawtooth star. So essentially it will be a square of this with flying geese units on all 4 sides, solid blocks in the corner to make a really simple, really traditional star. But I think with the star legs in these really pretty sherbet sort of colors that go with the fabric, that's going to look super cute. The problem is that I only have a fat quarter of this. And if I do 2.5 by 4.5 inch flying geese units, I'll need a 4.5 inch square from here. And I've measured this fat quarter and I should be able to get 16 out of this. But 16 blocks isn't going to be enough for the quilt. So I also found this piece of fabric that I think I'm going to make as my alternate. So there'll be 16 of these, and I can probably get 16 out of this as well with the background fabric. Here's the background fabric. And then star legs out of these sherbet colors. So that'll be 32 blocks. I think a 5 by 6 layout should be a nice size. So that will give me 30 blocks that I need in total. And so there should be enough here to do that. I've also pulled out this green, which I think is really pretty, and this interesting plaid. So one of these will definitely be the binding, and I'm not sure if I'm going to use the other one yet. So we'll have to see as we go along. This is a design as you go kind of project. And because I love this one far more than I love this one, I'm going to do my test block out of this fabric. So I'll cut a couple of 4.5 inch squares out of this. And then as well, I really don't want any waste at all. So I will look up the measurements online to make the no waste flying geese units in order to make the star legs for the plan. So I'm going to go make a test block and then we'll come back and talk about how that goes. This is my test block and it has come out really well. Really happy with the way that that worked. I decided that I wanted to use a no waste flying geese method because I have a very limited amount of fabric here. So as much as I love the sew and flip method to make flying geese units and then using those offcuts for other projects, I don't have the luxury of the fabric to do that. So I went to our trusty Google to look up the dimensions to make a 4.5 by 2.5 inch flying geese unit using the no waste or the 4 at a time flying geese method. And I found two websites that had great tables of information. The first is the Quilting Jet Girl, and the other is Material Girls. And thankfully, or interestingly, because they're obviously using the same math, their numbers matched up. So I knew I was on the right track. It's good to double check these things, I think. I ended up going with the table from Quilting Jet Girl. And I'll put a link in the description down below for both of these sites so that you can use those tables for yourself. I prefer the Quilting Jet Girl table because they give three different options. They give an intermediate, beginner, intermediate, and advanced. The idea being that if you are an expert and you do this perfectly every time, you will know that you don't need to trim anything and it'll turn out perfectly. But if you are not sure about your accuracy or how perfect you might be able to do this, they also give an intermediate and a beginner. And each of those steps assumes that you're going to do a little bit of trimming at the end. So I know myself fairly well, and I decided that I was going to use the intermediate tables in terms of the sizes that I cut. So for a 2.5 by a 4.5 inch flying goose unit, I need 5 3/8 for the background fabric and 3 inches for the points. So that's what I've been cutting. Now, as I got to 15 blocks, I paused because I know that I can get 16 center squares out of my two focus fabrics, out of my two focus fat quarters. So that's 32 blocks. But 32 is a difficult number to plan a quilt around. So I've decided that I'm going to use 15 from each one and make a 5 by 6 block quilt. So that's 30 blocks, 15 of each, which means I need 30 background pieces. And then of course enough star legs and enough of these squares to make 30 blocks. So as I was cutting my background, I very quickly realized that I was rapidly running out of background. Rapidly. This is all that's left. And so, in consultation with Jason, started to look at other options. I found another beige that might work, but there's only this much of it. So, definitely not enough for 15 blocks, but I could do some with that. And then there were these two, and I'm not sure if the camera and the lighting in here, I really miss my lights. I will get them set up soon once the shipment arrives, but it's not here yet. But these are just, they're just not quite right. The beige one is okay, but there is still a real difference there that I just don't like. And then this one is just far too white and it makes this look dirty, and I don't like that at all. So I don't really have a lot, but there is this super cute fabric with the little tiny flowers on it. And it was actually Jason's suggestion that maybe I swap out the four corner pieces for this little flower, and that would help connect the blocks together as well. And I thought that was a really, really lovely idea. And then looking at the fabric I have left, I can squeeze out 29 in total of these. And then there should be enough left, and that's this little piece right here, to do one of the blocks with a traditional sew and flip flying goose approach. So that's what I'm going to cut now. I have found that I can cut 10 star legs out of one of our fat quarters. So I need 30 in total. So I'll be able to cut all the star legs out of the fat quarters I've selected. Now it's just a matter of getting the backgrounds all cut perfectly before I get to sewing. So wish me luck. Here I go. So let me take you through the steps to make the no waste flying geese units. So I started with the measurements from Quilting Jet Girl. So this piece is 5 3/8, and this is going to give us our no waste. Then I took the other measurement, which is 3 inches, and I have drawn a 1/4 inch, sorry, I have drawn lines on here 1/4 inch off of the center in both directions, because those are going to be my sew lines. And to sew these together, you line these up in opposite corners like this, and you can see where my sew lines, 1/4 inch on either side of the center line, are. I'll take those over to the machine and I'll sew them down. And when I do that, I end up with this piece. And I hope you can see on camera the sew lines here on those lines that I drew. And then the next step is just to cut these apart. This is actually quite magical the way this all comes together, and I'm grateful for people who have done the math so that we don't have to try and figure that out. So with that sliced, you now have these two pieces. And if you take those over to the iron and press these pieces back, you get this little piece that looks, depending on your perspective, a little bit like a heart or a little bit like a cat face. I think it's quite cute. So you get two of those. So you press those, and then you take another square with the lines drawn, again, 1/4 inch on either side of the center line, and you sew, take those over to the machine and you sew those seams. And when you do, you end up with a piece like this. And of course, you do it on both pieces. And then this is sort of where the magic comes. This is where we now cut this in half again, like this. And then, ta-da, you have a flying goose unit, flying geese, flying goose unit. And so you take these over to the iron and give those a press. Now, if you have used the expert level measurements from Quilting Jet Girl, these should be, if you're a perfect seamstress, seamster, I don't know what's the gender neutral of seamstress. Anyway, if you're the perfect sewist, your perfect measurements should give you perfect flying geese units. I am not perfect at all. So I've used the intermediate measurements, so I need to trim. And so let me show you on this one, which is really well trimmed, which is really well pressed, how to trim. Now, I found it really handy, excuse me, I found it really handy to use the 45-degree marks on my ruler to line things up to get this really square. So let me show you how to do that. And you know what? I'm going to pause and I think I'll zoom you in so we get a really close look at this. All right, so here we are zoomed in on my unsquared up, untrimmed flying goose unit. Now, the 45-degree line is here, and I want a 1/4 inch, I want this point to be a 1/4 inch from the edge. And so to do that, I am going to line up my ruler like this. I have the 45-degree angle along this edge of this seam, and I have the 1/4 inch mark right on that point, which is exactly where I want my block to be so that when I sew it onto my project, I'll get a nice sharp point. So that's how I decide how much to cut off on this side. And so I will do that like that. Okay. And then to flip it around, I know that this has to be a 2.5 by 4.5 inch unit. So that's pretty easy. I'm just going to come up over here now to 2.5 inches, line it up nice and straight, and give this a slice. And then to do the left and right side, I want to use that 45-degree line again. Now in this instance, I want this point to be in the center of my unit, and my unit will finish at 4.5 inches. Half of 4.5 is 2.25. So I want the 2.25 inch line, which intersects the 45-degree line right there. And you see that? I have the 2.5 inch line on my ruler, and where it intersects the 45-degree line right here, that's my point. So if I slice this off and then trim this to 4.5, I'll have that point directly dead center in my flying goose unit. So let me just do that. So it's only one side you have to worry about, because now I know that I can just trim this to 4.5 inches. And it will be perfect. My point will be perfectly centered, and there we go. Sorry, it was crooked on the board. There we go. My point will be perfectly centered both horizontally and vertically, and that should be the perfect unit now to sew into my final block. Here are all the blocks all laid out, and I think it looks super cute. It's so sunny and bright, and I just think of sherbet ice cream, and I think it's really, really sweet. I've got my 30 blocks laid out in a 5x6 layout, and these blocks will finish at 8 inches, so they're about 8.5 inches now, which means the final quilt will be 40 by 48 inches. And as we've seen through this video, there were a few compromises to be made, so let me squat down and try and show you where those compromises had to come into play. So the first, of course, was that I needed 2 centers, because 1 fat 1/4 wasn't enough to make an entire baby quilt. But I think these 2 have come out really, really well, and I really like the patterned one, of course, is my favorite, but I think the little tiny flowers complement it really, really well. And then we ran into some issues with making sure we had the right amount of fabric. I substituted these little flowers at Jason's suggestion into the 4 corners of each block. But then I ran out. Do you believe it? I ran out. So there are 3 blocks that are back to the original plan. This one here, which I've put over at the edge. I've put another one down here in the bottom corner. And then the third one is up here along the side. So unfortunate, but I think they're scattered around the quilt. They're way over in the edges, and I don't think that anyone's ever going to notice. At least I hope not. I think it looks super cute. The next step will be to sew all of these little pieces together.
And this is the result of the Sherbert sawtooth stars. I think they look really sweet. And that focal fabric is still makes me smile to see all of those cute little shapes all in the center of those stars. So those are the three baby quilts. It has been a bit of a challenge along the way, but I'm really pleased with the results. And I hope that you see that even though there may be some bumps along the way, there's very often a solution. Sometimes it's piecing pieces together, sometimes it's finding a substitution, sometimes it's making do with what you've got. But I think these baby quilts have turned out really, really well. Thank you very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.